In a small Spanish village, there was a woman named Maria Gomez. One day, while Maria was looking down at her kitchen floor, she discovered what seemed to be a human face staring back up at her. Disturbed by the face, Maria decided to destroy it. But what's scary is the face came back. To make things even worse, over the next several years, dozens more faces appeared, some fading, others shifting, as if the floor was alive. Tests found no paint, no hoax, and no clear cause. This is the disturbingly true story of the Faces of Bélmez. In August of 1971, Maria Gomez Camara was cleaning her kitchen when she noticed a dark stain forming near the stove. At first, she thought it was water damage, something seeping up from beneath the old concrete. Over the next few days, the stain began to take a certain shape. Maria started to make out the eerie outline of a human face that was appearing on the floor. Eyes, nose, even a mouth. She tried to scrub it away, poured bleach, even scraped at it with a knife. Nothing helped. The harder she cleaned, the more clear the face became. When Maria's husband Juan saw the face, he called a few neighbors over to help come take a look. Everyone agreed. It was unmistakably a face pressed into the concrete. Rumors spread fast, and within days, people from all over the town were showing up just to see it for themselves. Finally, out of frustration, fear, and a worry for Maria, Juan took a pickaxe and destroyed the section of the floor completely. After the face was gone, fresh cement was poured in its place, and the family tried to move on. Just 1 week after the floor was repaired, Maria noticed another dark patch forming in the same spot. Within a few days, the familiar shape returned. Another face, sharper than before, staring up from beneath the new concrete. Word spread beyond the town. Curious locals, priests, and even journalists came to see the so-called miracle. Some said the feature shifted slightly each day. Others swore it was alive, that its expression changed when people entered the room. The mayor eventually had to step in and see what was going on for himself, ordering the area sealed and examined. It was no longer just a neighborhood mystery. Things were getting serious. By late 1971, the phenomenon had grown beyond the family's control. New faces were appearing across the kitchen floor, not stains, but clear human features pressed deep into the concrete. The mayor ordered the area sealed and called for an official excavation. The workers the mayor brought in broke through the floor and began digging several feet below the surface. What they found wasn't plumbing or wiring or any chemical source. It was human bones. There are many different accounts as to how many bones were found in total, but most agree there were several partial skeletons buried directly beneath the kitchen. The bones were old, dry, and layered in compact soil. Some were missing skulls, but none of them were placed in coffins, suggesting they'd been there for generations. Historians later confirmed that the property likely sat on the edge of an abandoned cemetery, dating back centuries. The remains were gathered and reburied properly in the local cemetery before the pit was refilled and sealed with new concrete. For a few weeks, the faces disappeared, but then they came back. One morning, Maria noticed another face pushing through the cement. Again, clearer, sharper, almost like a photo. Within days, more began to appear across the kitchen floor. Some faces were large and faint, others small and detailed. One looked like a man screaming, another seemed to fade and reappear depending on different light. The family and neighbors documented every face, and visitors swore the expressions would change over time. As word spread, researchers began arriving to study the phenomenon firsthand. Samples of the concrete were collected and sent to experts in Madrid. Their report found no traces of paint or pigment, no signs of tampering, just ordinary cement. Skeptics argued the images could be caused by chemical oxidizers, moisture, or lime reactions, but the experts tried it all, trying to recreate at least a close resemblance to the original face. But despite their efforts, they simply couldn't recreate the faces that formed in the concrete. Even decades later, scientists today still fail to find evidence of a fraud. Through the 1970s and 80s, the faces kept appearing. Some were faint outlines that vanished within days. Others developed slowly until they were strikingly human. Many of them formed right in front of the viewer's eyes, without anyone or anything disturbing the floor. By the end of the decade, at least a dozen distinct faces had been photographed and documented, some male, some female, and a few resembling skulls. Each time the floor was repaired or repainted, new ones emerged nearby, not just in the kitchen, but now spreading into the adjacent rooms. Scientists, priests, and skeptics all took turns trying to solve it. No one could explain why the faces seemed to move, fade, and reappear, or why they reacted to the attempts to destroy them. When Maria would try to ignore it, the activity would slow, but when investigators or locals arrived, new images would begin to form. The Bélmez phenomenon felt reactive. Whenever it drew attention, it seemed to respond. By the 1990s, the Bélmez faces had become a national curiosity. Tour buses stopped at the tiny house, journalists photographed the worn floor, and skeptics still argued over what they were actually seeing. María Gómez lived in the home until her death in 2004. Even in her final years, she insisted she never created the faces and didn't understand why they would appear. The original floor remains partly intact. Some of the older faces are still partly visible and sealed beneath the glass for visitors. More than 50 years later, chemical tests, photographs, and eyewitness accounts all agree on one thing. No one has ever been able to prove how the Faces of Bélmez were made, or why they kept coming back. So the simplest theory is that María Gómez created the faces herself. Skeptics believe she used a household chemical like silver nitrate, acid, or another oxidizing agent to burn the images into the cement. These compounds react with light and moisture, creating gray to blackish colored stains that can resemble photographs once they develop. It's a practical explanation. Maria was home most of the time, she had access to cleaning agents, and the faces often changed or reappeared after she worked in the kitchen. But there are problems with the idea. The process is unpredictable and very hard to create an image with. Even if possible, none of the tests ever found chemical traces or brush marks. Even when scientists tried to replicate the faces using the same materials, they couldn't reproduce the detail and permanence seen in Bélmez. Maria herself denied any involvement until the day she died, claiming the faces frightened her as much as anyone else. If Maria created them, she managed to fool chemical analysis, investigators, and decades of scrutiny, all from her kitchen floor. Of all the evidence in this case, this next piece feels the hardest to ignore. When the kitchen floor was dug up, workers uncovered human bones buried in the compact soil beneath the concrete. Records confirmed that Maria's home sat on the ground of an old cemetery. From that moment forward, the pattern changed. The first face had appeared before the excavation, but the flood of new ones only began after the graves were disturbed. No one has ever proved a link, but the sequence is impossible to overlook. Buried remains unearthed, and immediately after, a house that refused to stay quiet. Even after the bones were moved to a proper cemetery, the images returned, as if something below wanted to be seen again. Half a century later, the most in-your-face explanation might also be the most unsettling. And that explanation being that the floor of the house in Bélmez might have been trying to give us a message from the dead buried beneath it. Some investigators, however, believe the mystery of Bélmez wasn't tied to the house at all, but maybe it was tied to Maria herself. You see, they suggested Maria may have been the one carrying whatever force caused these faces to appear. From the beginning, the phenomenon seemed to follow her. The images grew stronger when she was home, faded when she left, and after she died in 2004, they nearly stopped completely. Some believed Maria had unknowingly absorbed something from the graves beneath her kitchen, that by living above the dead for so many years, she'd become a vessel for them. If that's true, the faces weren't haunting her home. They were manifesting through her. And when Maria was gone, so was whatever lived with her. More than 50 years later, the mystery of Bélmez remains untouched. Every test, every theory, every explanation still leads back to the same concrete floor and the faces that refuse to fade. Maybe it was a trick of chemistry, maybe it was the dead, or maybe it was something in between, something that science still doesn't have a language to measure.